Building a family can be a complicated, messy, lonely, and sometimes heartbreaking process. But you don't have to navigate this challenging journey alone.
Welcome to the AllPaths podcast, where we support and celebrate all of the different ways there are to grow your family. We are your hosts, Kate and Emily from the nonprofit organization AllPaths Family Building. And today we're talking with Shannon about her journey. Shannon, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Oh, I'm so honored. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Kate. I'm so happy to be here.
We're happy to chat with you. So before we get into your family building journey in more detail, we'd love for you to introduce yourself briefly for our listeners.
Yeah, sure. You and your listeners will learn that not much that I do or say is brief, but I will try to be as brief as possible. So I'm Shannon. I live in Western Massachusetts in Berkshire County. I have been with my husband since high school. So we are high school sweethearts, and we have been in the Berkshires for 4 or 5 years now. We're both originally from New York, so if you hear a Long Island accent, I try my best to hide it, but it will always sneak out, especially as I speak in long drones and terms and all that. I work in marketing technology, but I also am a yoga teacher as well, and that is how I got connected to AllPaths as well, since I've done some fertility yoga. I've taught prenatal classes before as well. And, outside of my fertility and IVF journey, I, spend as much time as I can outside. That's why I live in Berkshire County. I've got a golden retriever and 2 cats, and, just try to live as much of a quiet lifestyle as me and my loud husband can afford.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you.
I love it.
So let's jump right into your family story. Can you tell us where your journey began?
Of course. And before I get into where I began, I do just want to share where I'm at now for all listeners, just to be sensitive. I currently am ending my 2nd trimester of pregnancy, which is beautiful and wild and strange, and I'm sure I'll get into it, but just as a sensitivity warning for anyone listening, I will talk about IVF success as well as my current pregnancy. But it took a climb to get there, right? As so many of your guests talk about, and so many women and families and couples face. So, if I really take it all the way back into my mid-20s, expanding a family, having children was always something that was kind of maybe not. And it was mainly because I was focused so much on where I was, where Brian and I were. Brian's my husband, building up my career. We were living out in San Francisco. And I only mention that now because I think the kind of blasé nature of me having kids or not having kids was because I just simply did not know that it could take a long time, that there could be underlying issues. And I think now looking back, when I speak to people that I work with or friends who are kind of younger, I don't say it to scare them, but just say, there's so many possibilities out there. So just educate yourself and advocate for yourself, right? Which is going to be a huge theme of what I talk about. But Brian and I started loosely trying towards the end of 2021. And I say loosely, I knew nothing. I wish I knew nothing now. You know what I mean? Sometimes I have too much information in my brain. I've had at least 4 or 5 doctors, including the director of reproductive surgery at Boston IVF, ask me how long I've been a nurse. I am not a nurse. I work in marketing tech. And it's just because I know too much about the reproductive system at this point. But back then, when we started loosely trying, I didn't know anything about my cycle. I didn't know anything about tracking. And was just kind of like, okay, it's been 4 months. Why isn't this happening? And because of my generalized anxiety and my type A personality, I went to my OBGYN and said, I know that we haven't been trying for that long. I know that I am 29 years old, but let's get the show on the road. And I'm happy that that happened because I had an ultrasound early 2022. And I remember my OB called me and said, "Yeah, can you type in this term for me? Type in hydrosalpinx." Something I've never heard before, and quite honestly, like maybe those listening have never heard it. And basically what a hydrosalpinx is, it is a block in and a fluid dilation buildup in one of your fallopian tubes. And she just kind of said, "Okay, look this up. You have this. Have a good day." So I look it up, and of course,
First of
like,
all, I'd be like, could you spell it?
right, right, right.
But
I'm like,
yes. And
okay.
then you're alone with Dr. She hangs up and you're alone with Dr. Google.
Yeah. And I'm like, is this a Greek word? Like, what is this? And so now then it's like, you have to have your tubes removed. You are going to lose half of your fertility. And I'm like, what the hell does this mean? So, I had that in the back of my mind, and then I finally got in touch with another OB at the practice, and she was like, "Let's do something called an HSG. We're gonna test. We're gonna see the patency of the fallopian tubes." Because, from my Dr. Google search, hydrosalpinx comes up when you have appendicitis. Never had that. When you had an STD, never had that. When you have endometriosis, I mean, who knows if they have endometriosis at this point? That's a whole other story. So I got the HSG and they were like, "Okay, great, everything looks good." So I just went from being diagnosed with this hydrosalpinx to now being told that everything is good. And that kind of happened back and forth for about 6 to 9 months. No pregnancy, nothing of that nature. But I always had in the back of my mind, why would they say that I had this that seemed so dire, that seemed that something that needed an urgent fix? And then they were like, "Well, you know what? Why don't we try Clomid?" You know? So I did a couple cycles of Clomid, got pregnant both of those cycles, and unfortunately lost both of them. And that was rug pulled over my eyes, right? Working with doctors who said, "Okay, well, let's just kind of throw this at the problem." And then you have that positive test, and it is very quickly ripped away from you. First was a true chemical pregnancy. The second one I got to 6 weeks. So I took a break, right? I needed a mental break. I was working with an IVF clinic. This was in 2023. And I was working with an IVF clinic, but I wanted to do some more testing. So we did every test under the sun, uterine biopsy. We did more ultrasounds, saline ultrasounds. And eventually I got an MRI because they were like, the MRI will show about the tube. And I got this MRI and they're like, "You don't have a dilated fallopian tube at all, but you do have stage 3 endometriosis." And I said, "No, I don't know if that's true." Right? So at this point, I'm packing it in, right? I'm like, this is not going to happen. Nobody can tell me the right thing. And I felt really defeated at that point. So I took a break. I said, "You know what? I'm just going to kind of put this in the back burner. They're telling me I don't have a dilated tube. I feel comfortable doing Clomid again, but I'm just going to wait a couple of more months." I had other stuff going on. Biggest, like, so grateful that I was able to take a break. I really worked on myself, worked on my relationship, because you lose a lot of that when you go through these types of journeys. And at the end of 2023, I spontaneously conceived. And everybody was like, "Oh my God, this is it. This is the miracle." And in my heart of hearts, I said, "I don't know how I feel about this. This is strange. This doesn't feel right." And lo and behold, I lost that one around 6 weeks too. So at this point, the IVF clinic that I was working with got bought out by Boston IVF. And that was the best thing that could have happened to my journey, because finally somebody was ready to listen. I knew the whole time, once you told me in 2022, "Okay, I have this dilated fallopian tube." And it's interesting because sometimes I feel like I do fall into the rarities of rares. I had a very strange situation happen to me in 2013 where I had a routine kidney stone surgery, but they botched it completely. Hopefully you don't have any listeners in Dresden, Germany who work in surgical, because those are the people
I
who.
don't think so.
Okay, so I'll talk freely about it. If you are listening, I'm sorry. Give me a call if you want to talk about it, but you did botch the surgery completely. And I remember when I came back, this was 2013. I was, 19, 20 years old, and I was in Germany for a school trip, college trip. And when I got back to the States after this surgery, they said to me, and I will never forget this, you have so much debris in your body from what the stent did. The stent was misplaced. It was rubbing up against my bladder. I know this is very gross
It's
and
awful.
medical.
No, it's awful. It's terrible.
But I knew the moment I had this hydrosalpinx, I said the fallopian tube is
Mm.
very close to the bladder. It's very close to all of that. They all get squished. This is scar tissue. This is happening. Something is going on. So I kept talking about it with my doctors. They were like, this is the strangest story I've ever heard. And I said, nice to meet you. This is
You're
me.
like, it's my life.
This
Yeah,
is
it's
my life. This is
Yeah.
my life. And I had it, this is now 2024. I'm working with Boston IVF. I do an egg retrieval. Everything is going well. I get 2 euploid embryos at the end of it. And I said, you are not putting this embryo that I worked so hard for in my body until someone definitively says to me this fallopian tube is fixed. And I got another HSG. And it's funny because at the HSG, the radiologist or the nurse said, okay, everything looks good. My doctor called me and said, everything does not look good. You're going into surgery. And I said, thank you so much. So much. And listen, did I want to get surgery? No, no one wants to get surgery. But it finally felt like somebody was looking at the same thing that I was looking at.
Mm.
So I got the surgery. Dr. Bortoletto, Boston IVF, phenomenal surgeon, phenomenal man. He looked me in the eyes after the surgery and said, your tube looked like a hot dog, and this was most likely the cause of why you've had all these miscarriages. And it just felt like someone listened. And why is that so difficult? I don't know. But somebody was listening, and we had a follow-up. He checked a bunch of scar tissue for endo. None of it came back as endometrial tissue. It was all this scar tissue. He did a couple of other things while he was there. Just, while he's visiting, I had a very small septum, as somebody told me was a bicornuate uterus. That's a whole other story. I've been told that I've had everything under the sun, and I knew that it was a very specific tubal issue. And I said, okay, what do we think? He goes, go get pregnant. 3.5 weeks later, I transferred an embryo, and here I am. And I recognize that not every story ends that way. And I am incredibly privileged for that. But I knew in the back of my mind this entire time that correlation equaled causation at this point. And I just kept driving that through. And, in the beginning, sure, I wish I asked more questions. I wish I asked for further testing. But it all kind of came out in the way that it was supposed to. Not in an everything happens for a reason, but going through IVF has taught me so much about my resilience and so much about myself. And now I can confidently sit here and say, your intuition is correct. If you have something to say, make sure you say it. So that was a very long story. I warned you all. I warned you all in the beginning, but and listen, IVF was, I don't want to say a fantastic journey because I don't think anybody wants to do that. But for me, it was something in the way that my personality is. It felt approachable because it felt like something that I had jurisdiction over and control. And the timing and the data and, just everything laid out, very scientific, worked for me. And, but it was still a roller coaster, right? Because, when I did IVF, I was 31. I, had normal AMH, normal AFC, got 30 eggs at my egg retrieval and ended up with 2 euploid embryos, right? So it was a roller coaster because we only had 6 fertilized out of 26 mature eggs. That was like me hitting the pavement after this humongous high. And looking back, again, it all worked out in the end. I had six fertilized. I had two blast. And this was like, all right, we're packing it up. Like this, why does nothing good happen? But both of them ended up euploid. And so even when you do everything right and you feel like you can control things, like things are just going to be thrown at you. But I trusted myself, I trusted the process, and I just continued to advocate. And I'm very happy to be on this other side. I have, an embryo in the freezer. I have this new lease on my fertility. It's interesting because I don't even know what homeostasis is in there because I had the surgery, the tube was taken out, and then I immediately had a transfer. So who knows what it looks like post, right? I can't even think about that at all. But it is an interesting thing to think, well, I don't even know what my natural fecundability looks like right now. But it doesn't matter because, intuitively I know that this particular embryo was meant to be with me. And I had to go through this type of journey to learn about myself, to put myself first too, which is something that I don't do often and I am not going to do when this child is born. So I learned a lot through it. And what I tell people who are going through IVF or kind of working through like the ping pong of doctors, this is your body, this is your life. Like you should ask questions. Why wouldn't you? Because you need to know what's going on. So that's the story.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I'm so sorry for the losses that you guys experienced along the way. And also related to that, the long delay in getting the actual care and answers that you needed and that you knew in your heart was something was wrong and that you weren't getting the right information. So I'm just so glad you got it eventually, but very sorry that it took so long. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon that we hear this, and I'm always so struck by the people that even when you're getting care, because I think there's all these people who don't even know something is wrong and go years and years undiagnosed, and that's so devastating, or misdiagnosed. But then even when you have people like already starting to advocate for themselves and getting care, it's like if they don't get the quality care that they need, they don't have the answers they need to be successful. But I'm very happy you got them eventually and got good care.
Yeah, me too. And thank you for saying that. And it's interesting because my knee-jerk reaction when I think about the losses that I experienced, that I suffered, you know, I immediately want to say something like, "Oh, it's okay. It wasn't that bad. It was early." Something like that, right? Where I hear other stories of friends or other women, and it's all heartbreaking. Regardless, a loss is a loss. Miscarriage is a death that you are experiencing, and it has the extra complexities of it happening inside of you, right? But I talked about this. I talked about my miscarriages. I became like Mrs. TED Talk of miscarriages, right? And I realized after my third one that talking about it was not healing in any regard, right? I thought, I was actually having this conversation with my therapist yesterday where I am someone where if I'm going to have a thought, I'm going to think about if this thought is productive or not, right? So for me, I was saying, okay, well, this sucks. Oh, I'm going through it again. This double sucks. This triple sucks. But what is this going to do for me in this moment? Nothing. Let me keep moving on. Let me talk to this person. Let me go through here. Let me keep pushing, right? Let me joke. Let me have some dark humor. That is not healing nor processing. So first you have to process, then you have to heal, right? I didn't give myself any time to internalize any of my losses. And it doesn't matter if it was 4 weeks, it doesn't matter if it was second or third try losses. This is happening to you. So at the end of 2023, when I had my third miscarriage, I read the book I Had a Miscarriage by Dr. Jessica Zucker. And that's when I had the realization with some of the chapters and some of the things that she said that I was not actually fully internalizing what was happening to me, what had happened to me. So I had to take some time and say, this is something that occurred. You can't just run away from it. You're allowed to feel grief. And you also are allowed to move on, right? But I had that knee-jerk reaction when people would say, I'm so sorry for your loss, or, you know, oh, I can't imagine what's happening to you. And then you get, of course, the more, you know, concerning and annoying things of you're so young, take a break, blah, 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 you know, all of these things that are not helpful. But I would have a knee-jerk reaction to be like, I'm not a martyr, please don't do this, right? And that was a frustrating war within my head of like, I would like to talk about this. I would like people to know because I don't want other people to feel alone, but I do not want people to make me a martyr. And that even happened with my fertility journey in general. I don't like the term infertility, right? Because it makes you feel like you are less than. And honestly, you know, it's mostly subfertility, right? Like, at least in my case, like there was something, and that's the way I was thinking about it, that like there is something in my way and I can clear it. Now, I'm lucky that that was my case. I know that as I've learned, there is, you know, those that don't have that particular experience, but I never liked the term infertility. So I would always talk about it as fertility challenges, fertility struggles. And I think just in a way that was me not being able to come to terms with what was happening to me, right?
And I hate it even more as like an adjective, like you're an infertile person. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I'm like,
Oh,
we never say that. We don't even really use infertility that much in AllPaths, but we definitely never use it as an adjective. I'm like, ugh,
Because
it's terrible.
we're all so much more than that.
We're so many
exactly.
different things.
A
Like,
hundred
yeah,
percent. It is
yeah,
something that we are going through, and it is something that
right.
we are struggling with, and something that we are working with.
Yeah.
But it is not who I am, so I'm glad that you understand kind of where I'm coming from, because sure, I was having this, and it wasn't even like, oh my God, I can't believe this is happening to me. Because again, in the back of my head, I said, well, I know exactly what's happening to me, and it stems from Germany in 2013, right? Side note, I went to Berlin in 2023, so not even Dresden, and I like had a full panic attack being in
Oh
Germany again.
God. Yeah.
It
You're
I can
like,
imagine.
and it's like, well, this is not the country for me. Like,
no, let's
I,
cross that off the
I
list.
can't do this. Um, but it, you know, it was this identity challenge, identity crisis that I was having. But I also was thinking at the same time, there are so many other people who have it worse than me, right? And even with the
Mm,
miscarriages, there are so many other people who have
that's
it worse than me. And for me, I am privileged that I could afford IVF. I have a job that helped with IVF coverage. I have a roof over my head. I have a strong partnership. I had all these things that I don't take for granted and I'm so grateful for, but it all kind of tied into, you know, oh, everybody else has it so much worse. Why do I feel this way? And it did not stop. It exacerbated when I did get pregnant, right? Where there were people who would come to me after I announced my pregnancy and they're like, you've come so far. You've deserved this. I can't even imagine. And I'm like, once again, please do not martyrize me. I don't know if that's a word. Please don't make me a martyr. I'm here. I went through stuff. We all go through stuff. And I'm going to be honest with you. I'm sharing this story because I don't have a resolution to it because I still deal with it. But I think it's real for so many people who are pregnant or have had children.
that topic comes up so often in our groups.
Yeah.
Like, and we have this constant conversation like this is not the pain Olympics. Just because somebody on paper might have had things
Yes.
like quote unquote harder, that doesn't mean that your feelings around your experience aren't valid. I don't know what it is about us that makes us so quick to like
I
invalidate our
know.
own feelings.
Right.
I mean, women in general are going to feel that way, right? We're going to want to invalidate. We're going to want to put other people first. We're going to want to make ourselves small, make our emotions small. But you're so right, it's it's an interesting dichotomy for me where I do not mind that my journey, my story is public. I've made it public for a reason because there are others who don't feel comfortable speaking that truth, and I don't want them to feel alone. But then when people, when it becomes insular of like, look at all of these hard things that you've done and you deserve this. I don't know. It makes me feel like, but do I? Right? And this kind of comes into just anxiety in general, where I've suffered from anxiety for probably my whole life. And I am on an SSRI. God bless. It's great. And I have a phenomenal therapist. And we were talking about this yesterday, where I actually feel in a place right now, I am late in my second trimester. I feel I'm having a boy. I feel him all the time. Very active child. I am very grateful that all of my scans are positive. And I sit and I worry, why am I not more concerned? Why am I not fearful for birth? This is what I talked about yesterday with him. I said, I don't actually feel afraid for birth. I don't feel afraid about bringing my child home. I am anxious that I am not afraid. What is that about? And he goes, it is because you have visited this toll booth of anxiety so many times throughout the early parts of your pregnancy, throughout the parts of your fertility journey, through IVF, through surgery, and you have nothing left to give this toll booth, but it's still calling you, right?
Mm-hmm. In our house, we call it the roving anxiety. Like it's there. Yeah. It's just going to find something to attach itself to, whether it's actually logical or not. But it's just always there.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
100%.
But I was going to say, I feel like this processing that you're doing is so healthy for your transition to parenthood, though, is because I think a lot of people in our community, when they finally are parenting after infertility and loss, they feel this pressure to be delighted by every single aspect of parenthood, and that they cannot complain, they cannot struggle, they cannot ask for help. That I don't believe that for any parent, but certainly not for us. It's like we need to know that we don't have to, that these things can coexist, that we can be deeply, deeply grateful and recognize that it is hard and that it requires a community of support, just like trying to become a parent is benefited by a community of support.
Of course.
So I actually think it sounds very healthy that you're not allowing this kind of like, I don't know, like, yes, I have sacrificed so much.
Right.
I think it sounds very healthy. Well, I wanted to ask you another thing, because you mentioned how your losses and just trying to conceive and all of it does impact even a really strong relationship, certainly with your partner, but also with other loved ones and other friends and things. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Like what were the impacts on relationships, and then sort of were there particular things that helped make that, help you weather those storms?
Oh, of course. And it is so valid and so real that the relationships that you hold, whether it be romantic, partnership, friendship, family, the dynamics of those are going to change. There are going to be people in your life that just fundamentally do not understand that what is happening to you is medical and not mental, right? So don't feel like you have to be the explainer. I ended up doing that, right? Where I felt like I had to advocate to everyone under the sun what IVF was and what was happening to me. And if that brings you joy or power, sure, but realize that's not your job at all. Your job is to take care of yourself. There are friendships that I had to limit and then come back to or friendships I had to fully cut off because I wasn't getting what I needed from that particular person. There was a time where I had 3 of my incredibly close girlfriends all be pregnant at the same time and all have their children around the same time. And the way that I communicated with them was different because of the dynamics of that relationship. But I set up from the beginning, I said to them, listen, if I need to scale back, I'm going to scale back. And please know it has nothing to do with you or your child. It's for my own health. So I think if you have a friend who loves you and cares about you, and you say something like that to them, it's a litmus test on the strength of that friendship. Because I had people who said 1000%, please let me know what I can do. And then I had people who said, that felt very selfish and that I don't ask enough about them. Right? So it's a litmus test on where it is. And it is because of, likely maybe what they're going through, or, they don't feel comfortable, and that is fine. But if that's not serving you, that's not serving you, right? And when it comes to Brian, my husband, right? I think Brian and I are very, very, very similar. If you ask anyone around us, they know that we were meant to be together because we are mirrors of each other, right? So we work through a lot of the same stress in similar ways where we need to talk it out, talk it through, go through everything, right? So, but obviously, we both get tired of that because we both want to talk about the thing that's stressing us out, right? So there would be a lot of times where Brian would be like, are we going to go through this again? And I don't blame him for that, because sometimes I was stuck in a circular loop and I was stuck in circular reasoning. And sometimes he does the same thing about whatever's stressing him out, and I react the same way. I'm like, we're going to go through that rabbit hole again? Didn't we do that 2 days ago? So I think the biggest thing is understanding what you need from someone, not reading anyone's mind, right? Laying it out on the table. I had to say to Brian, this is what I need from you right in this moment. And most of the time it was just somebody to listen to me. A lot of the time it was to distract, right? But I had to say that. I couldn't expect that he knew what I needed in that moment, because honestly, all 3 of my losses, I kind of needed different things. So I think the biggest advice that I would give to somebody is, don't expect anybody to know exactly what you need. It just all goes back to advocating in micro and macro levels. And maybe you don't know what you need. I get that. I was there too. But the people who you want to surround yourself are going to be patient and respect that. And if you are someone who's listening, who's on the other side, right? You are the friend to somebody who's going through loss. Just say, hey, I love you. And I'm here for you. Whatever that looks like, as it changes every day, every hour, every minute, I got you. That's all we really need. We just need to know that we're not alone.
That's so true, because so often people, whether it's your partner, your family member, your friends, they feel like they need to fix things.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, first of all, unless you're an RE or you have experienced this before, like, I doubt you can fix things.
Yeah. Can you operate on my fallopian tubes?
That would be great.
Have you ever thought about X, Y, and Z? Like, chances are we've thought about it. Our care team's thought about it. You just need somebody who will sit there and listen and be in that space with you. And it can be, like you said, it can be really difficult with partners, just because I think a lot of times we're used to that person being our person for these situations.
100%.
And when you're both going through it together, it can be so hard to be that support for someone while also needing support. So we love when people find other outlets. Yep. So maybe they both attend support groups. They both have therapists. You recognize that, okay, we're in this together, but we can't be the only source of support for each other.
Absolutely.
That's true. That's great advice.
So throughout this whole process, aside from the people that you ended up kind of surrounding you who were able to offer support. Were there any like tools or resources or practices that helped you stay grounded through the more difficult moments?
Well, I will say a tool that was certainly very present in my entire first trimester that probably didn't help ground me, but Chat GPT has brought this baby to life pretty much, okay? If you needed it, if you want to laugh or maybe cry, you can look at my Chat GPT history where I basically used it as a therapist for the first 12 weeks. So maybe don't do that, but if you do, know that there's no shame because you're not alone. It is depressing, the things I used to ask ChatGPT. It used to be like, my fetal heart rate at 7 weeks was 161, and I transferred a 3AA euploid embryo. Am I going to lose this baby? And I swear at the end of it, ChatGPT was like, hello, Shannon. Hi again. Please stop asking me this because I can't use my AI energy to keep saying the same thing to you over and over again, right?
I wouldn't even have thought of ChatGPT for that, but
oh well, yeah, just I swear it's a scary history. And I still use it now every once in a while where like I am interviewing some birth doulas, which I kind of am still on the fence about, and I'm like, please tell me some questions I should ask my doula before my induction. It's a great tool in those ways, but please don't use it as your therapist. Go to somebody who has a license, okay? Not AI. But I will say that everyone says to you, don't use Dr. Google, don't go on Reddit. You're gonna do that if that's how you cope, okay? Yeah. So please know that don't feel shame. I Googled everything. I Reddited everything. I
ChatGPT'd a lot of things.
I used AI. I'm in the future, right? So if you do that, give yourself 30 minutes to do it. Don't fall into rabbit holes because information can ground you, and it can, especially if you're somebody like me who is type A, who likes control, who does want to fix things, it might give you comfort. It's going to be temporary comfort because you are going to 3 hours later have another thing that worries you. So I would just give yourself a screen time limit on those types of things. In terms of feeling grounded, right? Removing yourself from the situation and kind of forgetting that it's happening to you. Whether it is a fertility journey, do something that has nothing to do with that. Take your dog for a walk, go on a date with your partner, hang out with your friends. If you are pregnant, especially in those early days, do something that has nothing to do with you being pregnant, right? Go for a walk, go on a date with your partner, go hang out with your friends, right? Read a book, do something that is completely separate from that. And it's difficult because this is literally happening inside of you and it's hard to forget, but it's a conscious, mindful practice because even, we talked about this, right? Infertility is not my label. Infertility is not my identity. Being pregnant right now is not the sole marker of my identity. And when I do give birth and become a mother in 3 months, it is going to be a big part, but it is not the only thing that makes who I am me, right? So you have to remember these mindful practices to take yourself out of the equation that you are so consciously fixating on. And that helped a ton, right? So yes, you are going to look up every single thing and it's not shameful. And none of this is shameful, right? Especially going through fertility. We are programmed to think that we are the only person going through these fertility challenges and that it's rare. It's not rare. It's more common than ever before. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Quite honestly, I think it's more common just because people are talking about it more because we have done a lot of work breaking down the stigma. But it's not shameful at all either. So take yourself out of the equation. It's not the only thing that makes you you. And that will help you feel like you get a little bit of you back as well. And then you can jump back into it and be like, oh yeah, that's happening to me too, right? But giving yourself time to be another version of you that isn't this is really, really helpful and was very helpful for me throughout everything I experience, good or bad.
And I know you're getting, or maybe you already have been passionate about advocacy too, which of course I love to hear.
Yes.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, 100%. So, like I said before, these challenges that we as women, we as partner in a partnership, we as families go through is not rare. It is not shameful. And a lot of the reasons why we go through this in silence is because we're not talking about it. So for me, advocacy starts very small circles, having conversations. Think about something that you are, what we just talked about, this different splinters of your identity. Think about something that you're good at. Maybe it's through your job. Maybe it's a hobby that you do. For me, I teach yoga 2 or 3 times a week, and yoga as a practice, meditation as a practice, mindfulness as a practice, and this femininity of fertility work really closely together hand in hand. So the first foray of advocacy that I did, my yoga studio that I teach at has a donation-based class around Thanksgiving, and I offered to teach it, and I offered, to have this lens of AllPaths, of resolve at a wider scale, of just talking about this in general, right? And that was a very interesting place to be because I was 8.5 weeks pregnant, talking about how hard it is to get pregnant, right? So that was an interesting dynamic in that moment. But just because I was pregnant didn't mean all of that went away. That's something too to call out. But I had so many people from that class come up to me and say, "You have inspired me to finally call the IVF clinic. You make me feel like I'm not alone." And this is why I do that in the small scale. And I'm hoping as I continue to work with you all at AllPaths, as I continue to learn more, I want to continue to grow that advocacy and have these conversations on a larger scale. I know where my strengths are. My strengths are talking. My strengths are, connecting. And I want to use that for good, right? And I think especially when I have my son in a few months, and as he gets older, these conversations will be had, right? Where my son will know all about reproductive health. My son will know about different challenges, and not in a way where it's going to be scary or going to be shameful, but just to have that level of awareness. And if and when I have a daughter, know that that will happen too, so that when my daughter is my age, or when my daughter is in her early to mid 20s and she's having similar thoughts about this is going to be easy, I hope to God it is, but at least to know that she can still be in control wherever that goes. So for me, really, advocacy is starting very small, starting at home, having these types of conversations, listening to other people too. I have learned so much from others. I'm not the only one on this journey. Like I've said so many times before, I'm not a martyr. I'm not a saint. I'm not, the leader of the parade, but I'm part of this community. And I don't want anyone else in this community to feel like they are the only one on that island. So that's why I have these conversations, and that's why I hope to continue my advocacy journey through this.
That's wonderful. This whole episode is already full of good clips and advice for folks, but we do wrap up with 2 questions that we like to ask everyone. The first is, what is one thing that you would say to someone who is just starting to grow their family? And the flip side is, what's one thing that you wish people would stop saying when someone lets them know that they're struggling with fertility or family building?
Yeah. If you're starting off on this journey, whether that journey has already put some boulders in your place, or if you're just taking the first step, don't compare yourself to anyone else, okay? Social media is a highlight reel. It's designed to put the best foot forward. These challenges that you may face, and maybe you will never face them, but other people are facing them, they are not rare and they are not shameful. And the best tool you have to figure out these problems is your voice, is your brain. and is the connection you have with your team. And that team can be a medical team, a care team, a partner, friends, family. But you are at the center. So advocate for yourself. We as women, I'm generalizing here, but we are programmed to think that if we ask questions, we are annoying. If we ask questions, it's because we don't trust people. No, this is your body. This is your journey. This is your future. This is your child or children. If something feels strange, it is probably strange. If something feels confusing, it's probably because it is confusing. And it's not all on the medical team, and I won't get overtly political, but women's reproductive health is not well studied, is not well funded. I mean, the stat is something around, it takes on average, 7 to 10 years for a woman to get diagnosed with endometriosis. Mm-hmm. And there are so many women who are diagnosed with endometriosis or have endometriosis and they don't know. And that is a big boulder. It's not there forever. I mean, IVF is a beautiful tool, but if you don't know, you don't know. There is a fertility doctor, Dr. Natalie Crawford. She's big on social media. She has a phenomenal podcast as well. She always says, and I love this, you can only work with the data that you have. You can only make decisions on data that you have. But if the team that you're working with doesn't know how to get that data, that can be hard for you too. So the only person who has 110% your best interests at heart is you. So ask the questions, don't be afraid. So that's the advice that I would give to somebody just starting off.
Love that.
If you are a friend or a family member of somebody who is struggling, please don't placate that person. Please don't have the just type of sentences, right? I know that I'm speaking to these people directly now. I know that you have no malintent. I know that you are trying to help and smooth things over, but it's a surface level smooth, right? When someone says something like, "Oh, you're so young, you have time," or "Oh, you can just try again," "Oh, well, thank goodness it was so early," you know? When you say things that start with a just, or when you say things that try to take the pain out of the situation, it's because we don't want to sit with discomfort. Let's call a spade, right? But there is so much discomfort in this particular journey. And that person knows all of these things. I knew when I went through my miscarriages that I was under 30 or just 30. I knew that I had the privilege and the power to have medical team, to be able to afford IVF. I knew all these things. I didn't need anybody else to tell me, right? But also, no one else can tell you what is right and wrong for you. Sure, maybe oh, you're so young. Maybe every single person around you is on their second or third kid, right? Does that make you feel young? Not in that moment. Oh, you just need to relax. Oh, you need to go on vacation. Maybe I've been on 4 vacations this year and nothing happened, right? So you shouldn't be made to feel bad that the expectation that you had in your life is not coming to fruition, right? And when someone says things, these platitudes, what to placate, to, again, without any malintent, take the discomfort out of the situation, it is saying whatever you want for your life is invalid. That's not true. Because maybe that person who's saying those things, they have expectations and it hasn't gone their way either. So I think the biggest thing, if you are around someone who is struggling, maybe don't say anything at all. Maybe just say, "I'm here for you," whatever that looks like. And that might move and that might change, but I'm here for you. And let that person talk. And maybe they will never speak because they're dealing with it in their different way. But you're putting it back on them. So that's what I would say. I hope that made sense.
It made perfect sense. I agree 100%. Anything that starts with just or at least, like, just shut up. Don't say it. All that does is make you feel better. The person saying it, be like, "Oh, look, I was helpful." And I said, no, but that you're not the focus of this. Like you were saying, like, center the person who's going through the experience and validate their emotions. Don't say some random platitude because it makes you feel like a good person.
And that's what it is.
Yeah. And because also, like, even if something worked for another friend who went through something similar, you are a different person just because, like, they wanted to be distracted and that worked for them. That's great. If you want to be heard and if you want to vent to them, like, it needs to be the person deciding what they need, you know? So I think it's totally wise what you've shared.
Kicking it back to Jennifer Redmond's episode, was that like 3 or 4 or something?
Yeah.
Which is like, all you have to do is say, like, I'm here for you. This really sucks. Do you want to be, was it helped, heard, or hugged? Like, that's
Helped, heard,
that covers every single possibility, puts them in control. And like you were saying, Shannon, it changes so quickly. Like one day you might want to be, oh, sure, you can help me do research. And then the other day you're like, I don't want you to say a thing. I just want you to hug me while I cry.
Yeah. Or take me out for ice cream.
Yes. I love that. And, you know, it's interesting because the person who is saying those just statements or saying something to kind of divert or deflect or solve, you're so right. It's self-serving to that person in that nature because they don't want to sit in the discomfort. But the person you're talking to doesn't have a choice. They're already sitting in that discomfort. Right. So think about that when you're having that conversation, that you might be able just to cut it off and say something and wipe your hands clean. That person can't do that. So it makes them feel even worse about it's being only in making that situation. It worse. They're like, no one's going to be here with me. Or they don't think that that's worthy of, like, then you get in your head and you're like, maybe this isn't such a big deal. Or maybe I'm blowing it out of proportion.
Yeah, exactly.
100%. And listen, I have said the just statements to myself. I have said, well, you know what, Shannon, you're young. You could do this again. You're going to do IVF. You know, it was early. I can say that to myself because I am self-regulating that, but I'm still living with that grief and discomfort. So just don't assume that anyone in those situations wants to hear that. Help, heard, hugged. I love that. That's what I'm going to start saying to people. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Shannon. This has been such a lovely conversation. We really appreciate your willingness to share your story to help others feel like they do have a community. So whether you are listening and you haven't told anybody about what you're going through, or you've shouted it to the whole world, you know, knowing that there's one other person who gets what you're going through is it's so validating and so helpful.
And if you are listening, oh my gosh, of course. Thank you so much for having me. And if you are listening and you don't have a person, please come find me. I'll be your person, right? Everyone deserves somebody to walk down that journey. So I am here, and this is why I'm having these types of conversations, why my loud, big mouth has been put on this earth. Truly, I believe that. So please come find me.
I love that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
We hope you'll join us next time for more family building stories and resources. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to make sure you never miss an episode. And follow us on social media at AllPaths FB, or visit our website, allpathsfb.org, for more information about our work. AllPaths Family Building is so grateful to the members of our circle of support who are vital to our ability to provide emotional support, education, and advocacy that is open to anyone struggling to grow their families. Today, we want to give a special thank you to our bronze sponsor, Boston IVF. Thank you for joining us for this episode. Please help spread the word so that anyone who is struggling to grow their family can join the conversation. It's an honor to walk with you on your family building journey.